He controlled the city's underworld with a single word. Men died when he lifted 2 fingers, but when the bell over a rundown roadside diner chimed at 2 o'clock in the morning, the most feared man in the city froze solid. There, wiping down a cracked laminate counter in cheap non-slip shoes, was the woman who had walked out on him 9 months ago, his ex-wife. And beneath her stained apron was a swollen, heavy belly. His heir, growing in the slums. The king had found his runaway queen. The smell of burnt coffee and industrial bleach had sunk permanently into Isla Marsh's skin. It was 2:14 a.m. The neon sign outside the rusty Anchor diner buzzed with a dying, arrhythmic hum, throwing red light across the scuffed tile floor. Isla pressed the heel of her hand into her lower back, arching to relieve the pressure grinding down her spine. She was 35 weeks along. Her ankles, thick and swollen, strained against the seams of her worn-out sneakers. The baby was awake, rolling against her ribs, protesting the long hours on her feet. "Almost done, little one," Isla murmured, her voice hoarse from disuse. She rinsed a gray rag in a bucket of tepid water, wringing it out with raw, chapped hands. The diner was a graveyard at this hour. 2 long-haul truckers slept in a booth near the restrooms. A lone cab driver nursed a cold coffee at the far end of the counter, staring blankly at a muted television. It was safe here. Invisible. Isla had spent the last 9 months trading the marble floors of the Voss estate for the anonymity of the city's forgotten edges. She'd walked away with nothing, no settlement, no lawyers fighting on her behalf, just a duffel bag and the clothes on her back. Damien had offered her millions. She knew exactly what that money would have cost her, tracking chips sewn into linings, shell accounts that reported back to him, the permanent, suffocating leash of his control. She'd signed the papers in a cold conference room, left her rings on the table, and disappeared. 3 weeks later, in a gas station bathroom, she'd stared down at 2 pink lines on a plastic stick. The bell over the glass door jingled. Isla didn't look up right away. She kept wiping down the counter, swiping a ring of spilled syrup into her palm. The heavy tread of expensive shoes on cheap tile registered somewhere in the back of her mind. Not a trucker. Not a cop. Cold air and the smell of rain rolled into the diner, cutting through the grill's stale heat. Booth in the back. A gruff voice. Face the door. Isla's hand stopped moving. The rag slipped from her fingers and landed in the bucket with a quiet splash. The blood drained out of her face. She knew that voice. Marcus. She forced herself to breathe. Asterisk, don't look up. Keep wiping. Maybe they won't notice, asterisk. She was wearing a shapeless mustard uniform, her hair scraped back into a greasy bun, 50 pounds heavier than the woman who used to be poured into silk and diamonds for other people's approval. She heard a chair scrape against tile. Coffee, black. Bring the whole pot, Marcus barked toward the counter. Isla wiped her hands on her apron, the fabric stretching tight over her stomach. She turned, reaching for the glass carafe on the burner. Her hands shook. She poured, staring hard at the black liquid splashing into a chipped mug, refusing to look toward the back booth. Then she felt it, the shift in the room. The sudden drop in temperature. A weight pressing against the back of her neck like a hand she couldn't see. She turned around. Damien Voss stood halfway between the booth and the counter. Charcoal overcoat dark at the shoulders with rain, a suit beneath it cut from wool so fine it looked poured rather than sewn. His dark hair was damp, pushed back off his forehead. And his face, usually a mask of terrifying stillness, had gone slack. He was staring at her. More precisely, he was staring at her stomach. The silence stretched like piano wire. Even the cab driver seemed to feel the apex predator that had just walked in, and sank lower over his cup. Marcus and Reyes, near the booth, followed their boss's line of sight. Marcus's jaw dropped. Reyes swore under his breath. Damien's eyes moved slowly from the curve of her stomach, up past the grease on her apron, past the hollows under her eyes, until they finally reached her face. Isla, he said, and her own name in his mouth sounded like a verdict. The coffee pot slipped from her hand. It shattered against the tile, boiling coffee splashing the hem of her uniform and the toe of his polished shoe. Neither of them looked down. "Sir, you can't be back here." The night manager, Mr. Callahan, poked his head out from the kitchen pass, clutching a spatula. "Counters closed for cleaning." Damien didn't turn his head. He lifted a gloved hand a fraction of an inch. Marcus stepped forward, one hand sliding inside his jacket. "Go back to the grill, friend. Stay there." Callahan saw the outline under the jacket. He saw the dead calm in Marcus's eyes and vanished without another word. Damien stepped into the spreading puddle of coffee, glass crunching under his shoe, and stopped inches from her. Close enough that she could smell rain on wool, cedar cologne, and beneath it, faint and metallic, the smell of a gun that had recently been fired. "You were supposed to be in Lisbon," he said. Low. Smooth. The voice he used right before he broke something. Isla took a half step back, her spine hitting the edge of the pie case. Her arms crossed instinctively over her belly. "Lisbon costs money. I wired $3 million to an account in your name and never touched it." His jaw tightened, a muscle ticking beneath his ear. He leaned over the counter, eyes dragging from her raw hands to her cheap shoes to the swell of her stomach. She kicked, a visible roll beneath the apron, and Damien went utterly still. For one fractured second, the boss of the Voss family disappeared, and a man struck by lightning stood in his place. "How far along?" he said. It wasn't a question anymore. "That's not your business." Her chin came up even as her voice shook. "We're divorced. The papers are signed. You have no right to be here. Do the math." His voice dropped, almost gentle, which was worse. "You left 9 months and 6 days ago." He gestured sharply at her stomach. "That's not new. You were carrying when you walked out, or you got pregnant the night before. Don't waste my time telling me it isn't mine." The lie died in her throat before she could even attempt it. There had been no one else, not during their marriage, not in the desperate months after. "You've been living in a basement," he said, flat, dissecting her with his eyes. "You smell like bleach and mildew. You're on your feet at 2 in the morning in a diner that serves truckers and addicts. No car. No security. I have freedom. You have a death wish." He straightened. "Get your coat." Panic flared. "No, I'm working. My shift ends at 3. Your shift ended the moment I walked through that door." He glanced over his shoulder. "Marcus. Find the manager. Pay for the damage. Tell him Isla's resigning. You can't do this." "I'm doing it." He rounded the counter into the staff area, a blatant violation of space that made the kitchen feel instantly smaller. Isla backed into the wall, groping behind her until her hand closed on a heavy metal serving spoon, a laughable weapon against a man who carried a custom pistol under his arm, but she held it anyway. "Don't come any closer. I'll scream. The cops in this district answer to me, Isla. You know that. And screaming will upset the baby." His eyes flicked to the spoon, then back to her face. "You hid my child from me. You put my blood in a grease pit on the edge of the city where any rival with a grudge could have walked in and found you. Do you understand what happens if the Dracos family learns my pregnant ex-wife is slinging hash on Route 9? They wouldn't have found out," she snapped, tears of frustration finally rising. "Because I was dead to you. You made sure of that. I put you out of reach," she fired back, breathing hard, her back spasming. "I didn't want him raised in a fortress. I didn't want him learning to check the underside of cars for wires. I wanted him to have a normal life. There is no normal life for us." Damien moved before her heavy body could react, closing his hand around her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, firm enough to still her completely. He took the spoon and set it on the counter. "Coat. Now. She didn't move. She stared at his hand around her wrist, the familiar warmth of his skin against hers stirring something sick and nostalgic in her chest. "Damien, please," she whispered, the fight draining out of her all at once. "I can't go back to being a ghost in a museum. Don't make me do this." For a half-second his grip loosened. His eyes moved over her face, the hollow cheeks, the exhaustion she was hauling around like a second pregnancy. She had been radiant once, wrapped in silk, an army of men between her and the world. Now she looked like something the world had already chewed on. He'd let her go because she'd begged him to, weeping on the floor of his study that his life was rotting her from the inside. He'd let her leave because he believed money could keep her safe from a distance. He'd been wrong. "You're not going back to the estate," he said. "You're coming to the penthouse. It's secure." He took her elbow, guiding her, gently, unstoppably, toward the back room. "My things. I'll buy you new things. I have a life here. You have a survival strategy," he said coldly. "A poor one. Locker." They stepped into the cramped, sour-smelling break room. Isla pointed numbly at a dented gray locker. Inside hung a thin thrift store coat and, at the bottom, a canvas tote. Damien stared at the coat with open disgust, then lifted it by the collar and dropped it in the trash. "Hey!" She lunged, but her belly caught his arm and stopped her cold. Before she could argue, he was already shrugging out of his own overcoat, the silk lining still warm from his body. He draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her whole, smelling of him. "Let's go," he said. Marcus was waiting by the front door with a stack of hundreds on the register. Callahan was nowhere in sight. Isla walked in a daze, the heavy coat dragging at her, and paused once to look back at the bucket of gray water, the shattered carafe, the black puddle spreading across the floor, her exhausting, miserable, safe life, over in the span of 5 minutes. Damien didn't look back. He pushed the glass door open into the freezing rain. A black armored SUV idled at the curb. Reyes held an umbrella, eyes constantly scanning the empty highway and the dark tree line. Damien kept a hand at the small of her back through the rain. It burned through the wool. Reyes opened the reinforced rear door and Isla climbed in, hauling her heavy frame onto soft black leather that felt like a different planet from the diner's cracked vinyl. Damien slid in beside her. The door shut with an airtight thud that swallowed the sound of the storm. "Drive," Damien ordered. The SUV pulled away smoothly, the diner's flickering sign shrinking in the rearview mirror. Isla huddled against the far door, pulling his coat tighter. She'd spent 9 months waiting for this exact moment, terrified he'd find her. Now that he had, the reality was worse than the fear. She pressed a hand to the side of her stomach. The baby had gone still, lulled by motion. "When is the due date?" Damien asked. "Not a request. A demand." 5 weeks. "You haven't seen a real doctor. There's a free clinic. They have an ultrasound machine. He's fine. He." The word hung there. Damien turned his head slowly. Even in the dim wash of passing streetlights, she could see something shift in his face, the ruthless, calculating boss cracking to reveal something raw and possessive and unbearably human. "A son," he said, barely a whisper, half prayer, half threat. Isla closed her eyes. She'd just handed him the one piece of leverage he needed to never let her go again. "Yes." He reached across the wide seat. She braced for him to grab her chin, force her to look at him. Instead his hand bypassed her face entirely and settled, with quiet, total ownership, over the center of her stomach. Heat seared through the cheap fabric of her uniform. "Mine," Damien said softly. He wasn't talking to her. "And no one hides you from me again." The private elevator to the penthouse didn't rattle or groan like the freight lift at the diner. It moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency, swallowing 80 floors in seconds. Isla stood in the corner of the brushed steel car, leaning on the mirrored wall, her legs made of lead. The adrenaline that had carried her through the diner was gone, leaving only a bone-deep hollowness. She buried her face in the collar of Damien's coat to block out the sharp scent of ozone. Damien stood in the center, watching her reflection in the doors. He noted the tremor in her knees, the gray cast to her skin, nothing like the flush of health she'd carried as his wife. "You're pale," he said. "Not concern. An assessment of a failing asset. I've been on concrete for 9 hours. That's a matter of perspective." The doors slid open onto suffocating silence. The penthouse hung 80 stories above the storm, walls of floor-to-ceiling glass 2 inches thick, ballistic, soundproof, built to survive a war. Poured concrete floors, polished to a black mirror shine. It felt less like a home than an altitude bunker. "Sit," Damien said, pointing to a massive charcoal sofa. Isla didn't argue, her body wouldn't let her. She sank into it, her knees riding up awkwardly around her stomach. Damien shed his jacket, walked to a black console, poured 2 fingers of amber liquid, and drank it in one motion. The front doors opened. Marcus came in first, followed by a slight, gray-haired man with a battered leather bag. "Dr. Whitfield. Thank you for the short notice." Whitfield didn't look tired despite the hour. The syndicate paid him precisely to arrive unbothered at any hour, for any reason. He remembered Isla from a gala a year ago, draped in diamonds, holding a room with effortless grace. Now she looked like a refugee. "Mrs. Voss," he said gently, opening his bag. "It's just Isla," she muttered, letting her head fall back. "And I don't need a doctor. I need sleep." "Humor me," Whitfield said, wrapping a cuff around her arm. Damien stood 10 feet away, arms crossed, watching the doctor's hands like they belonged to a stranger with a knife. The cuff hissed. Whitfield's brow furrowed at the reading. He moved to her stomach next, she stiffened, guarding it instinctively. "It's all right. Just checking the heartbeat." A cold Doppler pressed against her belly. Static, then a rapid, galloping whoosh 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 filled the room. Damien's rigid posture broke. He took 2 steps toward the sofa, eyes locked on the small plastic device. Strong heart rate. 152, Whitfield said, packing the monitor away. "The baby's fine." He straightened, turning to Damien, and didn't soften what came next. "She isn't. Her blood pressure is dangerously elevated. She's dehydrated and underweight for this stage, and her lumbar spine is under far more strain than it should be. If she keeps standing shifts like this, she'll go into labor early, and given her condition, I can't promise her body handles that well." Damien's jaw locked. He looked at Isla with something dark and possessive and furious. "Marcus." Marcus stepped out of the shadows by the door. "Boss. Go back to that diner. Buy it. Pay off the owner, pay off the staff, and shut it down." Isla shot upright. "Damien, no, there are people who work there. Callahan. I don't care about Callahan." His voice cracked through the room like a whip. "You risked my son for a minimum wage job. You starved yourself to hide from me." "I starved because you froze the accounts I actually had access to," she yelled back, tears finally spilling over. "I had nothing. You had me. You had an empire. You chose a slum." He turned back to Marcus. "Buy the diner. Shut it down quietly. If she tries to go back, I want nothing left to return to." When Isla woke, she didn't know the hour or the day. Blackout curtains sealed the master bedroom in total dark. She lay on a mattress that felt weightless, wrapped in sheets that cost more than her yearly wage at the diner. Her uniform was gone, replaced, by some maid summoned in the dead of night, with a loose silk slip. A small lamp clicked on in the corner. Damien sat in a wingback chair, tie gone, collar undone, a tablet glowing blue against the deep bruises under his eyes. He hadn't slept. He'd just sat there, watching the bed like a man guarding a vault. Thirsty? His voice had lost its booming authority overnight, gone rough and low. She nodded, pushing up against the headboard. Every joint ached, but the crushing exhaustion had lifted. She must have slept 10 hours. He poured ice water from a silver pitcher and handed it over, their fingers brushed, his cold, hers running hot with third trimester heat. She drank greedily. When she lowered the glass, he was staring at her stomach again, the slip clinging to its curve. "You look," he stopped, visibly hunting for a word that wouldn't sound like weakness. "You look like a mother. I am one. Or I will be, soon." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "Why didn't you tell me, Isla? In that lawyer's office. Why not just say it? Would you have let me go?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel. He looked at the floor. "No," he admitted, barely audible. "I would have burned the city down before I let you walk out with my child." "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," she said, voice trembling but resolute. She gestured around the room. "Look at this place. Ballistic glass. Biometric locks. You'll tell me it's safe." "It is safe. It's a vault, Damien. You lock money in vaults. You lock guns in vaults. I am not a possession. Neither is this baby. You think I want to live behind 2 inches of glass?" He stood, pacing, restless as something caged, and yanked back the heavy curtain. Gray daylight flooded in, the city sprawling beneath them, small and indifferent. "There's a war out there. The Dracos family is bleeding my southern territory dry. My own lieutenants are getting hungry. Weakness is an open invitation. You think you were living some noble, independent life in that diner? You were a target waiting to be found. They didn't find me. I found you," he said, turning, eyes gone black and flat. "If I can find you, they can. And they wouldn't have brought you a doctor, Isla. They'd have cut that child out of you to send me a message and left you on the tile to bleed out." She flinched, hands flying to her stomach. She hated him for saying it. She hated it more because it was true. "I couldn't raise him in the estate," she whispered, the fight going out of her again. "I remember what it was like, bodyguards at the grocery store, cars swept for explosives, men bleeding on the carpet at 2 in the morning. I watched you lose pieces of yourself to this life, Damien. I watched you turn to stone. I couldn't let my son watch his father become a monster." He was quiet for a long, agonizing moment. He didn't defend himself. He didn't deny it. "I am a monster," he agreed softly, coming to lean over the bed, his presence total and overwhelming. "But I'm the monster that keeps the other monsters away. And right now, that's exactly what you need." The illusion of peace lasted until just past noon. Isla sat at the marble kitchen island, forcing down a bowl of fruit and oatmeal the chef had prepared. Damien sat across from her, reading reports, drinking black coffee, an almost convincing replica of their old married life, but you ignored the silence and the fear underneath. The lock chimed. Marcus walked in without knocking, jacket open, holster visible, face grim. "Boss. We've got a problem." Damien didn't look up. "Speak." "It's the diner. Went down this morning with a crew to handle the buyout like you said. Place was taped off. Cops everywhere." Damien's finger stopped moving on the screen. He raised his head slowly. The temperature in the room dropped. "A hit," Marcus said, shifting his weight. "Professional. Came in around 5, right after we left. Shot up the back booths, torched the kitchen, left a message painted on the wall." Isla's spoon clattered against the bowl. "Who was hurt?" "Callahan." Marcus didn't answer her. He looked at Damien. "Who?" Damien said. "Low. Final. Draco's crew. They didn't find who they were looking for, so they made a mess. Callahan took 2 rounds. Didn't make it. Dishwasher's critical. Isla clamped a hand over her mouth, sick rising in her throat. 5 a.m., 3 hours after Damien had pulled her out. If she'd fought harder, hidden in the storeroom instead of getting in that car, she'd be dead. Her son would be dead. Damien stood slowly, his face gone completely blank. The man who'd pressed his palm to her stomach in the SUV was gone, the head of the Voss family stood in his place. They were looking for her, he said. Not a question. Word leaked that you pulled someone out of that diner last night. They know she was carrying, Marcus confirmed. Guys are already checking hospital maternity wards. Damien shrugged into his jacket, adjusting the cuffs with mechanical precision. Find the shooters. I don't care how deep into Draco's territory you have to go. Bring them to the packing plant on 4th. And Dracos himself. Leave the old man. Take his lieutenants. Take their teeth. His voice was utterly without mercy. Leave the bodies in their own cars, parked outside his estate. Isla sat frozen, watching him hand out torture and murder like line items on a ledger. You're going to kill them, she whispered. I'm going to gut them, he corrected, closer now, bracing his hands on the marble, trapping her in his shadow. They came for my son. They came for you. Men like Dracos only understand one language. It's just blood, she cried. It's always just blood with you. It never ends. It ends when they're all dead. He reached out, thumb brushing a tear from her cheek, brutally tender, a stark contrast to what he'd just ordered. You wanted the real world, Isla. This is it. He pulled back. Don't leave this penthouse, he told Marcus, loud enough to make the implication land. If she runs, lock the door and lose the key. He walked out. The steel locks engaged behind him with a sound like a coffin closing. For 3 days, Isla didn't see the sun. The storm stalled over the city, battering the ballistic glass in sheets. She paced the length of the penthouse in soft slippers that did nothing for her swollen ankles, kitchen island to sofa to the heavy double doors, where 2 armed men with flat, unfamiliar eyes shifted their weight every time she got close. She was a prisoner. A fiercely protected one, but a prisoner all the same. It was 4:12 a.m. on the 4th day when the elevator chimed. Isla froze by the window, arms wrapping around her stomach. The doors opened. Damien walked in looking nothing like the immaculate king from the diner. He moved with a heavy limp, jacket gone, shirt unbuttoned at the collar and soaked through, not a mist of blood, but a full, drying, rust-brown stain. His knuckles were split and swollen. He stopped in the foyer, breathing hard, watching a drop of red fall from his little finger to the polished concrete. Go back to bed, Isla, he rasped. His voice sounded dragged over gravel. He didn't come toward her, walked instead toward the guest bathroom, keeping his distance like he was contagious. Isla stood rooted. Every instinct told her to run to the bedroom and lock the door, to hide from what this man did in the dark. She closed her eyes and saw Callahan's kind, tired face, the extra slice of pie he used to slide her way. Dead because of her. She followed the trail of blood down the hall. The bathroom door stood open. Damien leaned over the sink, water blasting, scrubbing his hands with a stiff brush, the water spiraling pink down the drain. He wasn't washing. He was punishing the skin. You're going to tear it open, she said quietly. He stiffened. I told you to go to bed. And I told you I'm not your property. She stepped in, reached past him, and shut off the water. The silence that followed was deafening. She took the brush from his rigid grip, and he let her. A violent man, neutralized by the quiet presence of the woman carrying his child. She wet a towel, added soap, and took his hand, working the cloth gently over his knuckles. Did you find them? Yes. There. They won't breathe again. His voice dropped into something terrifyingly calm. Dracos knows the south side belongs to me. He knows if he crosses the river again, I won't just kill his men. I'll erase his whole line. Isla swallowed the bile rising in her throat and finished cleaning the last of the blood from his palm. You did this for me. I did this because it's the only currency my world accepts. He finally looked at her. You think I enjoy coming home to my pregnant wife smelling like a slaughterhouse? He pulled his hand free and braced both against the sink, head bowed. I tried to build a wall when we were married. Keep the blood outside, keep you in. I thought the money and the houses were enough. A bitter laugh. I was a fool. It always finds a way under the door. That's why you ran. I ran because I was drowning, Isla whispered, resting a hand on his back, the muscles beneath his ruined shirt coiled like springs. I couldn't look at you and pretend I didn't know how the bills got paid. He turned his head, dark eyes meeting hers. And now, she said, her hand dropping to rest over her stomach, I know the wolves out there don't care if you're a good person. They just want to eat. She looked at the pink-stained towel in her hands. You're a monster, Damien. But you're his father. And if the choice is between you and the men who shot up that diner, she took a shuddering breath. I choose you. He didn't smile. He didn't pull her into some romantic embrace, the truth of their lives was too ugly for that. He simply covered her hand with his clean one, over the swell of her stomach. I will never let them touch you, he swore. Never. 3 weeks later, the last heat of summer baked the city, but inside the penthouse the air ran cold and sterile. Isla was 39 weeks now, her body no longer her own, a stretched, aching vessel. Sleep was impossible, standing was agony, sitting crushed her ribs. She spent her days in the orthopedic chair Whitfield had ordered, watching the hazy skyline. Damien was rarely gone more than a few hours at a time. The organization was restructuring. The hit on the diner had ignited a cold war with the Dracos family, and the streets had gone quiet, the terrible, breathless quiet before something detonates. It happened at 9:15 on a Tuesday night. Isla was pouring water in the kitchen, Damien sat at the dining table, field stripping his sidearm, the metallic clicks echoing rhythmically. Without warning, the penthouse dropped into total black. The hum of the air conditioning died. The fridge cut out. Isla gasped, dropping her glass, it shattered, the sound swallowed by sudden, oppressive silence. Don't move. Damien's voice snapped out of the dark, a tactical order, not a suggestion. She heard the slide of a magazine locking home, the chamber cycling around. Red emergency lights flickered on along the baseboards, painting the room in a bloody glow. Backup power, critical systems only. They didn't hit the grid, Damien said, pointing at the window. The rest of the skyline still blazed. They cut this building. This is a breach. A heavy concussive thud rolled up through the floor, vibrating in the soles of her feet. Explosives, ground level. He pulled her away from the island. Someone hit the lobby. The front door slammed open. Isla screamed, stumbling back, but Damien stepped cleanly in front of her, weapon raised. Hold fire, it's me. Marcus, breathing hard, a rifle slung across his chest, Reyes right behind him hauling an equipment bag. Report. Dracos didn't send a hit squad, boss. He sent an army. Parking garage and lobby, same time. Comms and cameras are dead. Maybe 40 men coming up the stairwells. How long to this floor? 10 minutes. They're blowing the fire doors as they climb. Damien turned to Isla. Walk fast. They moved down the long hallway toward the master suite, toward the panic room hidden behind the walk-in closet, a reinforced steel vault with independent ventilation, trauma supplies, and a hardwired line to outside security. Isla forced her heavy legs to keep pace, adrenaline masking the ache in her spine. At the closet threshold, a violent cramp seized her abdomen. Not the dull ache she knew, a crushing band of steel tightening across her middle. She gasped, please Butler, grabbing the dresser to keep from going down, knocking a row of cologne bottles to the floor. Isla. Damien caught her under the arms. She couldn't answer. The pain stole her breath entirely. When it finally released her, she looked down. A dark stain was spreading down the inner seam of her sweatpants. "No," she whispered, terror eclipsing even the gunfire climbing toward them. "No, no, not now. Boss." Marcus, from the hallway. 70th floor's breached. "We need to lock down." Damien's hesitation vanished, replaced by something primal and absolute. He scooped her up, she cried out at the shift in gravity, wrapping her arms around his neck. He carried her into the vault, a bleak concrete box lit by harsh LED strips, a steel cot bolted to the floor, cabinets of ammunition and trauma kits along the walls. "Marcus, get on the hard line. Call Whitfield. If he isn't in this building in 5 minutes, I skin him myself." "Boss, the lobby's crawling with Draco's men. Find a way." The words came out as a roar. Another contraction hit, faster and more brutal than the first. Isla arched off the cot, a raw sound tearing out of her. "It's happening," she gasped, locking eyes with him. The fear on his face mirrored her own. "They're on our floor," Reyes called from the doorway. "I can hear them." Damien turned his back to her, racked the slide of his weapon, and looked at Marcus. "Lock the vault. You two hold the hallway." "There's 40 of them, boss," Marcus said quietly. "I don't care if there's 100. You hold the line." Marcus nodded once and stepped out. Damien hauled the heavy steel door shut, the locking mechanism engaging in a sequence of final, definitive thuds. They were sealed in. A king, his runaway queen, and an heir demanding to be born inside a tomb of concrete and steel. Gunfire started 3 minutes later, muffled by the vault door but close enough to rattle the cabinets. A dull, rhythmic thunder, broken by the sharper concussions of breaching charges tearing through the penthouse Damien had built floor by floor. Inside the vault, the world had narrowed to pain and blood. "Breathe, Isla." Damien had stripped off his jacket and holster, hands braced against her knees, anchoring her. "I can't," she screamed, thrashing on the narrow cot, soaked in sweat. "You can. You have to." His voice stayed level even as his face went pale under the LED light. He tore open a trauma kit, scattering combat gauze until he found a sterile field sheet and surgical scissors, running purely on instinct, the same triage training he'd used on gunshot wounds, now bent toward the terrifying reality of childbirth. Another explosion shook dust from the ceiling. "They're going to get in," Isla sobbed, hyperventilating. "They're going to kill him. Look at me." He gripped her face in both hands, hot and anchoring. "No one is getting through that door. You focus on me. You focus on this child. Push." She screamed and bore down with everything she had left. The overhead lights flickered as the building's power failed further, leaving only the sickening red glow of the last emergency circuit. Outside, the gunfire swelled into a deafening roar, Marcus and Reyes losing ground by the second. Boots hit the hardwood outside the closet. Clang, a round ricocheted off the exterior of the vault door. Damien didn't flinch, eyes locked on Isla. "Harder. He's almost here." She dragged in a ragged breath and pushed with everything her body had left to give, every ounce of fear, exhaustion, and stubborn will she'd built over 9 months of scraping by. The pressure broke all at once. A sharp, furious cry cut through the vault, louder and truer than the gunfire outside. Isla collapsed back against the cot, chest heaving, tears streaming. Damien stood at the foot of it, holding a small, slick, writhing weight in his blood-stained hands, the boy furious, fists swinging blindly at the cold air of the bunker. Damien stared at his son and, for the first time in his life, forgot to breathe. The armor he wore to survive his world cracked and fell away completely. His eyes filled, spilled over, tracked down a face still gray with dust. He didn't see an heir to a criminal empire. He saw a fragile, perfect, entirely new life. He wrapped the baby in a sterile sheet and carried him to Isla's side, lowering him gently onto her chest. She pulled the bundle close, weeping into his damp hair, the smell of him pure and overwhelming. Damien leaned over both of them, arms wrapping around his wife and his son, his face buried in her neck. Three of them, huddled on a steel cot, a small bleeding island in a sea of violence. Outside, the gunfire stopped. Total silence dropped over the penthouse. Damien lifted his head slowly, the father receding, the killer surfacing again. He reached for his discarded weapon and stood between the cot and the door, aimed dead center. A heavy knock. "Boss." Marcus's voice, ragged and wet. "It's clear. We held them. Backup's up the stairwell. Draco's crew is finished." Damien didn't open the door. Not yet. He turned back to Isla, pale, bruised, breathtaking in the red light, staring down at their son. She looked up at him with the same devastating clarity she'd carried since the diner. They'd survived tonight. Tomorrow there would be another rival, another hit, another bunker. He walked back and touched the baby's small, curled fist with one finger. "I thought I could force you to live in my world," he said, voice low and stripped bare. "I thought the cage was big enough to make you happy. The cage is still a cage, Damien. I know." He looked from the baby to her face. "He won't grow up checking under cars for wires. He won't learn to scrub blood out of my shirts." "How?" Her voice cracked. "You're the head of the family. You can't just walk away. They'll hunt us to the ends of the earth." "No, they won't." The old calculation returned to his eyes, but this time it wasn't aimed at an enemy. It was aimed at his own throne. Because by this time next month, there won't be a Voss organization left to hunt for. I'm handing the territories to men who'll run them straight, walking away from the rest, and burning every ledger that ties our name to any of it. Isla stared at him, stunned. "You'd give up everything. For us." "I'd give up the world." He bent down, pressing a slow kiss to her damp forehead. "You wanted freedom, Isla. I'm going to buy it for us, one last time, in blood, and then never again." He straightened and walked toward the heavy steel door, toward the wreckage of the kingdom he'd built. Behind him, in the safe, quiet dark, his son drew another breath, oblivious to the fact that his father was about to burn down an empire just to keep him warm.